This episode, I begin a special two-part podcast series on leadership in education in Kerrville, Kerr County, with Dr. Charlie McCormick from Schreiner University, Dr. Brent Ringo, Superintendent of the Kerrville Independent School District, and Dr. Robert Templeton, Superintendent of the Ingram Independent School District. I know you'll enjoy this fascinating two-part series.
The Texas Hill Country is one of the most beautiful places on earth. In this podcast, recent Hill Country resident Tom Fox visits with the people and organizations that make this one of the most unique areas of Texas. Join Tom as he explores the people, places, and their activities of the Texas Hill Country.
That each of you not only have demonstrated, but maybe how you got to your style of leadership. And Dr. Templeton, I'm going to start with you. You lead what I'm going to characterize as a rural school district. Mm-hmm. And was there a person, a book, a class that helped you develop your leadership style?
Everybody's personality and leadership style is always influenced pretty much solely by your past relationships, and I would think that mine would probably just be my rural upbringing. I grew up in a very small town out in West Texas. There were 9 kids in my class, and we had to go 111 miles one way to buy groceries. And so it was a hard scrabble, a rough kind of upbringing. It was a great way to grow up, but I was raised by some really hard, tough men, and I think that probably influenced me as much as anything else. I'm married to a counselor now, and she's trying to soften me up. She has been for 25 years. It's working, but probably just growing up in an area really similar to where our kids are now.
Dr. McCormick, you lead Schreiner University, and you've been in post-secondary education for quite some time in your professional career. What would you say was the biggest influence on you in you helping develop your leadership style?
Like Bobby, I think we're all, and I am, a product of the environment in which I grew up. And I think my dad had a huge influence on my leadership style. I don't know that my dad would ever have described himself as a leader. And he was a jobber in a not quite that small of a town in West Texas, out in Snyder, but still a relatively small, isolated community out there. And he really taught me about the dignity of work. And he worked 6 days a week, went to church twice on Sundays. That guy never had any time to do anything for himself.
Sounds like a farmer.
That's right.
My dad.
That's right. But he never complained. And in fact, although he would never articulate it in this way, in the way he lived his life, he was honored to do that work. And you spend 18 years around something like that, and you can't wash that sort of stuff off. That gets inside of you. So my dad's been very influential, and I had a professor in college, a guy named Roger Abrams, who at the end of his career wrote a piece that a summative look back at his really illustrious career, and he wrote in there that we are not a race of spectators. That was just one line from it, but he meant a whole lot of things by that. But for me, and in terms of leadership, it's really convinced me that of all of us, in the midst of busy lives where we sit in a lot of meetings and we have a lot of lunches and dinners and people want 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, that we got to pay attention and not just be spectators in this world in which we find ourselves, but really active participants and people who can pay attention to the people who need and want some of our time.
Dr. Ringo, you lead the Kerrville Independent School District, perhaps our most recent resident to Kerrville, at least at this table, and fellow Longhorns, so we of course have to hook 'em. Shout out to that. What would you say helped develop your leadership style that brought you to where you are now?
I'd say my foundation, similar to these two, my parents. My dad's 88, my mom's 85. Dad retired at the age of 86. My mom retired a year and a half ago at the age of 84. Neither of them went to college. And growing up, very humble environment. We did not get to do a lot. My dad worked about 6 days a week, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. typically, worked on Saturdays. Same thing for my mom, had an hourly job, goes to church every single day, to this day still. And so that really provided a foundation for me in Amarillo, Texas, of just expectations to always work hard and not complain, because it is better than what we perceive it. And that second piece being, I guess, my experience at West Point. You grow up I was very fortunate of being successful in pretty much everything I put my effort into. And you get to West Point and realize very quickly it's designed to make you fail. And so you strain on the system, strain on you, realizing that there's challenges that you cannot overcome alone. And so that experience at West Point of really trusting the people around you, supporting the people around you, because you cannot make it on your own and yourself, and that motto of always choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong from the West Point Cadet Prayer. Still think of that to this day. I say that with my boys and my daughter every single night, and so it's just always focusing on the people around us and seeing how we can best support our family and friends to be successful.
Let me pick up on that and just continue with you, Dr. Ringo. And could you tell us 2 or 3, or maybe just a couple of the top leadership challenges you faced throughout your professional career, and maybe describe them and how you were able to successfully navigate them?
Yes. In public education, there's always going to be some challenges we face, whether that be local or from the state, issues that arise. And first challenge being, when we're facing it today, there's a lack of funding for public schools. We're still funded on 2019 revenue levels. And so as the leader of our school system, it's working with our teams, our principals, our teachers, to really find ways to support them without the financial resources. And so working on that vision, keeping the morale high, and growing our leadership pipeline, because what we do in education, keep people in it, and we want to make them successful. And to be able to overcome those challenges is ways of getting our team members involved, working with our local community, and getting that buy-in and support. And it's definitely not an individual effort to overcome those challenges we face day in, day out. And they change year to year. And so it's working with our team, getting that common vision, and tackling the small steps consistently. And as we tackle those small steps consistently and do those well, that lays that foundation for success. Because if you look at the big picture, it might seem unachievable, but it's one bite at a time.
Dr. McCormick, in your professional career, could you tell us maybe 1 or 2 of the top challenges you faced, describe them, and how you were able to use your leadership skills that you've developed to meet those challenges?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we faced at Schreiner is that a long time ago, and certainly well before me, Schreiner made the decision that it was going to achieve excellence. And that's unique in the world of higher education because, as these guys well know, there are a lot of high schools that are producing very high-performing students, and there is a massive race to recruit top of the class, highest SAT score, highest ACT score, and that's great, and there should be some good colleges and universities out there to accommodate those students. But there's a whole lot of other students out there who don't meet those metrics. Very capable, very competent, very talented, but they're not the top of their class, and they're not with the highest SAT score. And so Schreiner's history and its future is based on this notion that we're not going to just try to find the very top students, but we want to cultivate capacity. We want to cultivate competency with our students. We want to create excellence by design. And that means it's hard work, and you're not always successful when you do that, but it's really good work, and it's important work, and there needs to be several places around the country for those sorts of students to find their college educational home. And in terms of leadership, that doesn't happen because of the efforts of any one individual. That's really a collaborative effort. And that's one of the humbling things about being in our positions, I think, is that I guess the title's kind of fancy in some cases, and so many people do the hard work that sometimes we get the credit for. And recognizing that collaborative environment, appreciating that collaborative environment, and trying to build the people up around us and remind them of the important work they do, that's some of the real both challenge and opportunity for leadership.
Dr. Templeton, my sense is that you would probably echo your colleagues' remarks, but I want to overlay that with the rural school district. Mm-hmm. And you have a different set of challenges, at least some different challenges. Could you talk about some of the leadership challenges you face?
So whether it's if you're at Kerrville or Schreiner or wherever you are, all challenges really come down to taking care of kids and taking care of your staff. That is basically everything boils down into that, whether it's money or experiences or facilities or whatever. And probably one of the big challenges that we have right now is taking care of people and recruiting people. I actually started off my school career as a custodian. And just working my way up through the ranks, I have a really heartfelt appreciation for the people that are your food service people, your bus drivers, your custodians, those kind of people. If the three of us didn't show up for one day or for a week, nobody would notice. It would be okay. But if all of those people I just named didn't show up, we would have to close the doors on the very first day. One of the challenges we have is really just taking care of those people. Inflation's going up and things are getting more and more expensive, and those people struggle. That's probably one of the things that I worry about the most. And then the next challenge that we have is taking care of kids. It's really hard to be a kid these days. Tough to grow up. There's so many influences with social media and the kids these days. I talk to people all the time and they say that exact phrase. They say, oh, the kids these days. But the kids these days are smart. And the kids these days are resilient, and I'm really impressed with them. But the environment that they have to grow up in these days is really tough. And it's especially, I think, in rural schools, because we were just talking about earlier, so many of our kids don't have internet. I went to do a home visit probably, I don't know, it's been several months ago, and I don't even think they had electricity because there's some extension cords running into this old trailer house. But the kids that live there, they're just resilient. They just showed up. One of them's a top-ranking kid in our school. And, I'm rambling, but I think it all boils down, your challenges all are about taking care of your faculty and taking care of your kids.
Let me just pick up on that last point, because I do a lot of study of business leaders. I have had a father who was a department head at Texas A&M University. I have a mother, and when she was administrator for special education in the Bryan Public Schools. And my sense is that being a business leader is actually easier than the leadership challenges you face. And I say that because you have so many constituencies. Dr. Templeton, you mentioned your students and your staff. Mm-hmm. You also answer to a school board. You also live in a community where everyone knows you.
And where you live and what you eat and where you are on Friday nights and all of that.
And I think it was you, Dr. Ringo, talked about if you go to the grocery store, it's not going to be quick. But how do you lead so many different constituencies? Is it communication? Is it buy-in? How do you lead those different groups that may not always be aligned together?
I think that's two good points, communication and buy-in. You've got to have both from all. And you really work to communicate. I'll talk about communication especially. You really want to communicate and be transparent and let people know what's going on. If you make a mistake, I make them all the time. People can forgive a mistake, but what they can't forgive is a cover-up or lying about it or not being forthright. If you communicate and communicate honestly, I think you're okay. Buy-in is a little bit harder because I've been a school administrator for 27 years now, and through the 32-year career, just recently with COVID, you're going to have constituents that are going to say mask, no mask. Online education, no online education. Should we do this? Should we do that? Should we have a strict dress code? Should we not have a strict dress code? Those two things are diametrically opposed. So really what you have to do, in my opinion, is I think not try to have exact buy-in from everybody. I don't even try, honestly. I want to communicate. I want to have as much buy-in as possible. But other than that, I think it's really important just to have a true north, the paradigm of where you are going, and then just follow that. And not everybody is going to be on board, but if it's the right thing for kids, you can sleep pretty good at night. And we have a saying, and it's just something that we've come up with, and it's pull a Ronald Reagan, and that is, don't complain, don't explain, just work and do the best that you can with what you have. Not everybody's going to like you, and you want them to. I want everybody to like me. They don't, but buy-in's a fickle thing.
Dr. McCormick, in addition to many of the groups I named that Dr. Templeton has to deal with, you also have a donor class, and you have other educational requirements that are set by certifying bodies, et cetera. How do you navigate? Once again, my sense is your leadership is much broader than the typical business leader who may have stakeholders, but they're fairly limited. My sense is that you are a concert master with multiple stakeholders, and if that is a fair assessment, how do you navigate between those groups?
I think Bobby's covered a lot of it, and Tom, it's I don't know what's harder and what's easier. I've been in higher education my whole life, so it's all that I know. And what did somebody say? I don't know who it was who discovered the water, but it certainly wasn't the fish. So I only know the waters in which I swim. Communication is key. Articulating the vision is key. It's hard to over-communicate too much, and it's hard to over-communicate in too many modalities. And this is, for me, one of the real challenges that I have. People keep telling me, you got to be on social media. You got to get a TikTok account, or I don't know what it is, Instagram account. That just seems very foreign to me, and I don't do that very well. But there are still people who like a handwritten letter. Yeah. And so every week I find myself writing several handwritten letters. I don't know that anybody can manage the concert perhaps as well as they would like to, but you got to keep swinging the baton and setting the pace, and sooner or later you'll probably make some nice music.
Dr. Ringo, you have talked about your participation in the, I want to say the political process, but being called upon to be on commissions or committees to help advise the state and or the governor on educational issues. How does the leadership in that area work, in addition to all of your other leadership? How do you balance that constituency as well?
I learned early on from a great mentor, and this is another West Pointer. A 3-star general had said, you always want a seat at the table. And dealing with politics, you have, as mentioned earlier, you have people on both sides of an issue, and they're not going to change their mind. And so it is being a listener and really trying to understand why people feel a certain way, and knowing that you're not going to make everybody happy when you make those decisions. And so it's being a listener, being at the table, but letting really people get to know you and who you are, because if they can, and I truly believe this, is people may disagree with you, but if they understand your vision and the why behind it, and there's follow-up and explaining that why behind it, they will support you at times, even if they disagree with you. And so when you look at what's happening at the state level, even in the business world, what I love about what we get to do every single day is every decision we make is about the students. In the private sector, it's how many hours, billable hours can we get, how much more revenue, what can we do to increase the revenue stream. In the military world, it's about the mission and what that mission is and carrying that out. And our mission is about every single student and setting them up for success and whatever that may be. And so it's really understanding the politics that are out there, but every decision we make is not about the politics, it's about the students. And so that's how that transpires, not just from a local level, but to that state level, and really standing up for what we believe in for our students and what we can do to help them be successful.
I also didn't grow up in a small town, but it was a town with one high school. And of course, there's a lot of fervor for the football team, but it was nothing like Tybee Fight Never Dies. What's it like to come into a town where literally people from the 50s are coming back for high school reunions because Tybee Fight Never Dies?
It is truly amazing. And Kerrville is a very special place. I brag to my friends all the time about the history, the tradition. There's people from the 50s, as you mentioned, with our homecoming parade. We had the 1957 homecoming queen riding. I go to Rotary, and Bob over at Rotary is a 1956 graduate of Tybee High School. You have tradition from grandparents to parents to kids, grandkids, cousins, have all experienced Tybee Fight Never Dies. And I came from Garland ISD, which served 71 campuses, 54,000 kids. Prior to that was Highland Park, which was 7,000 kids. And so in this, it is truly a very special place that not only that we have to honor that tradition, but continue to grow that tradition, which is why I'm here. I'm selfishly, for my kids who are 10 and 8 and 3, get to experience that from this age on. And it's a very special place. When you leave the hill country, there's no other place like it.
Dr. McCormick, I'd like to focus on the geography and geographic impact of Schreiner University. Its tradition tells us it was for boys in the hill country to have a place to go, to have a military education. That obviously has evolved. But how do you see the role of Schreiner in the hill country or this part of West Texas?
Tom, Schreiner is like the vast majority of colleges and universities across the nation. And by that I mean we are local and regional enterprises. And it's easy to forget that when you look at the Harvards and the Stanfords and the University of Chicago's, where people travel from around the world to go to school there. But the vast majority of students travel on average 51 miles from their home to the place they're going to go to college. and have really embraced that. We lean into that. We don't know exactly what Charles Schreiner's motivations were for starting Schreiner University, but we think part of it was, we know there was a Tivy here already, and we think that he had spent enough time out in the middle of nowhere that he knew there were some kids who couldn't get to Tivy and back home in one day, and they needed to go, and then they could go back home. So the dynamics of this rural environment that you were talking about, we continue to be very much a sort of regional enterprise. We want to be that, and we very much want to have a rural outreach. And so we've got a special dedicated counselor, admissions counselor goes out there. We've got special scholarship opportunities for students from those areas. We're trying to do some interesting partnerships with places like Ingram. So we want to be part of this community. It's our intention to cultivate and build the capacity of this community. And that's not entirely unique, again, in the world of higher education, but it is what we think is living into our own best selves.
Dr. Templeton, I've heard you previously speak about the differences in income in Kerr County. And you talked about in your home visit, you went to a home that they certainly didn't have internet and they may not have had other more modern conveniences. How do you help, or how do you deal with literally that? This is a huge county, and Ingram is a big part of that in terms of its education. How do you help? There's currently a constitutional amendment about rural broadband that we're going to talk about in a little bit. How do you help educate and really make a difference in those areas?
We have kids in our district who, it's really interesting because we have kids in our district who the front gate of their house is probably more expensive than my entire house. And then we have kids who literally, we have to clothe them sometimes because they just can't afford a jacket or shoes and everything in between. The traditional wisdom is that it's different pitches for different batters. All of those kids should be, I don't want to say catered to, there's a different approach for every kid. And I totally disagree with that. I think you treat everybody the same, and if you've had a really tough life and if you've had a tough upbringing, we are not doing any kid any favor by coddling them. So one of the things that we really want to do is make sure that everybody is treated equally, there's high standards for everyone, and that every kid has the exact same opportunity to get somewhere. So because we live in an environment like that, we have every kid or not every kid can afford lunch, for example. So we have a program where all of our kids get free breakfast and lunch. We give all of our kids a laptop computer. There's all kinds of things that we do. I won't get into that, but there's just really a lot of things that you have to do in order to give kids a leg up from not just the socioeconomic standpoint, but from a rural standpoint. We were talking earlier about Charlie just got back from New York, and I like going to New York and that kind of thing. But so many of our kids, that might as well be going to the moon. It's just impossible for them. Half of our job is just to show kids that you can do it. Educating kids is not just about teaching a content area. I think more than half of it is just somehow convincing them that they can do this. So we have a no excuses philosophy, but you do have to have a heart for those kind of kids, for sure.
Dr. McCormick, you talked about the outreach Schreiner does. I'd like to turn to what I found was just an incredible initiative, and that's your banking initiative. And what so impressed me about that was there are challenges in banking in rural communities and they're in farming communities and other communities, other challenges that you might not see in Houston or a Dallas or a San Antonio. So I wanted to ask you about that initiative and other sort of business-focused initiatives that Schreiner is taking to provide a not middle class, but middle management to top management training for those issues particular to the rural communities of Texas.
Tom, this is probably a commentary on my leadership, but in so many of these cases when people bring new potential programs to the university, my first impression is, no, we're not going to do that. That's not a good idea. And that's where I was with banking in lots of ways. We had some regional bankers that approached us and said, has Schreiner ever thought about the banking program? And I thought to myself, no, and there are a lot of good banking programs around the state, and I don't see that we have a particular play in this area. But they really talked about the need of rural bankers and rural banks, and that this would be a place for us to step into and both recruit students who know about the rural environment and who are excited about the rural environment. They don't want to run off to the big city after they graduate. And those bankers wanted to partner with us with some golden handshakes and things like that to help these students not only be successful in their college. I'd like to take a lot of credit for that, but the truth is very smart people advised me, you should do this because there's a real need for this. And we've been trying to do that with some other programs, particularly finding ways in which we're going to add value to the rural environment. So we've just approved a new agricultural program, and Bobby's one of the guys who was telling me we should get on that several years ago, I think it was.
Yeah, it was.
Bobby. And so we want to be able to bring in students from the rural environment and then find ways to help them add value if they're going to go back and work on the family farm, on the ranch, or on the neighbor's maybe hunting lease or things like that. And that's all still in progress, but we think there's a real role for us to play there, and we're trying to do it.
Dr. Ringo, you talked about the involvement of the Tivy grads and community after they graduate. I want to turn to the current students. How do you help integrate them into this community? How do they either volunteer? How do they work? How do you really try to develop that sort of community spirit, leadership, and give them real hands-on experience while they're in school?
Well, that's a great question. Our schools are community schools, and part of that is our relationship with the community and our business leaders. From Rotary to the Chamber, understanding the needs of our community, working closely with our partners, Schreiner and the surrounding districts, and understanding the opportunities that are here, what businesses are coming here and relocating here. And what is great about what we get to do is we have the flexibility to add programs, certification programs at our campus, at our high school campus, with our students to partner with our local businesses for jobs. And so not only are they getting the training and certification through us at Tivy High School, but we have many students who are now going out as part of their course credit from Peterson Health to one of our local mechanic shops to home builders and putting those skills to practice. And so it's not just setting them up for course credit with us, but when they graduate high school, there is a pathway that if they choose to, they are able to start a career, and not a career that is just a struggling career, but a career that is going to provide for a family and contribute to our community and a growing community. And so it's really having those relationships and getting that feedback of what the need is out there to really support not just Kerrville, but Kerr County, and working closely with our local partners and local governments and then the Texas Education Agency and putting pathways in place that supports that vision and what that looks like.
Dr. McCormick, I was at the Museum of Western Art one Saturday, and you were there with a group of students. Mm-hmm. And it really impressed me that the president of the university was spending his Saturday afternoon with a group of students at an art museum. And I really, I wanted to ask you, not specifically about that event, but that spoke to me personally about a leadership style where you're going to interact with students, you're going to not work with students, but really help them understand how much there is in this community to offer and what they can offer when they leave Schreiner. And I was wondering if you'd say a few words about that.
Yeah, I think for those of us who live in a place like Kerrville, it's easy to forget all the things that this community offers. It's a small town that doesn't really feel like a small town in a lot of ways, as Brent's already suggested. So one of the things we try to do is show students all the opportunities that exist in Kerrville. Museum of Western Art, we actually bring them here. I'm going to let them hear from Jeremy talking about Kerrville as a micropolis, as he describes it. Going to the Arcadia, you should see the students' faces when they walk in there and both see the space and hear the sort of programming that goes on. And of course, they love taking selfies, so 1,000 selfies are taken off the back of that balcony back there. So this place is important, but I'll also just note, Tom, that I think probably for all three of us, and I know it's true for these guys because I see them all the time with their various constituencies, presence is very important in our positions. And you got to spend time with all of those constituencies, and especially our students at their games, at their performances, at their debates, all of those things that they do that are important, and they want somebody to share it with. And part of our responsibility is to share it with them.
Dr. Templeton, what does you and your school district do or provide around either students who express a desire to go to college, they want to get involved in leadership in the high school setting and moving on, or are truly exceptional? How do you really channel that to give the student the options we've talked about this morning?
Probably about 5 years ago, we were, and we being a group of people at the school, were sitting around the Hunt store, which is one of my all-time favorite places, and we were talking about ways that we could, and this is a big goal, really end generational poverty in our area. What could we do for student success? So we thought about maybe doing a backpack program or all kinds of stuff, but my wife, who considers this to be a personality flaw, we're just not wired for moderation. I really got tired of seeing bright, articulate, fantastic kids working at Sonic. And not that there's anything wrong with working at Sonic. It's just, you see so many kids who just don't live up to their potential. Fast forward to today, we started an early college program. So now we have roughly 100 graduates, and almost half of those at the end of the year will walk across the stage with their associate's degree, free of charge. And in something that's really anticlimactic, they'll come back to Kerrville the following week and actually get their high school diploma. And it saves every family about $50,000, so that to us helps bridge the poverty gap. And it helps these kids who are, again, there's nothing wrong with working at Sonic, but kids that are working at Sonic, it really gives them a chance to go and show how bright and articulate and amazing they are. I think that probably is the one thing that encompasses all of the things that you talked about.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Hill Country Podcast. The Hill Country Podcast has been recently honored with a Communicator Award as a top podcast in local rural issues. I hope you'll join us again for another episode. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And we'd love to hear from you if you'd leave a review. The Hill Country Podcast is a partner and member of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network. I've linked to our website below, and you can check us out, as well as checking out Pints, Pumpkins, and Pies for Polio.